I think oftentimes people are afraid simply of the unknown or of things they don't know much about. And so I think that this is largely where a lot of the fear and misconceptions come from what it means to live with schizophrenia. I think a lot of people don't really know what exactly schizophrenia is, and thus leads to kind of fear of this unknown. And I think this fear is also perpetuated by negative depictions that we see in news or in media about what it means to live with schizophrenia. And so this combination of not really knowing what schizophrenia is and these really negative depictions of people who are living with it ultimately lead to a ton of stigma around what it means to live with an illness like schizophrenia. So in today's video, I want to talk about why it's important to normalize talking about illnesses like schizophrenia and to normalize what it means to live with it and our understanding of that as well. Before I dive into that, I want to give a brief synopsis of what exactly schizophrenia is to hopefully combat some of this fear of the unknown. So basically, it's an illness that affects about 1 in 300 people worldwide, which translates to about 24 million people around the world who are living with schizophrenia. It's often characterized primarily by symptoms such as hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, but it goes beyond these symptoms as well to include things like negative symptoms, which basically mean a loss of a behavior. And these include things like emotional bluntedness. It includes things like loss of energy, loss of motivation, apathy. Schizophrenia also includes cognitive symptoms where keeping a train of thought is difficult, or you have scattered thinking, or you have what's called word salad, where you say things that don't really make sense to an outside observer. I think when teaching people about schizophrenia, it's really important to note that violence is not a symptom of schizophrenia, and it's just not a part of the illness. In fact, people who are living with schizophrenia are more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators. When people don't take the time to really understand what schizophrenia is or what it's like to live with the illness, it can lead to some really harmful comments or interactions that I've also experienced in my own personal life. I think maybe to start with, some of the comments that I get on YouTube are quite hurtful and stigmatizing in terms of what they say about what it means for me to live with schizophrenia. I've gotten a lot of comments saying that I shouldn't have kids, I shouldn't have a partner, I should be institutionalized, there's no hope for me. And this sort of narrative is being built by some people in the comment section. And I think, again, this comes from just a lack of understanding and a lack of awareness about what it actually means to live with an illness like schizophrenia. I've also faced stigma in the workplace and in other facets of life. In work, I've been pushed out of jobs when they found out about my schizoaffective disorder. I found that when people don't know about schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder and don't understand what it means to live with it, they kind of put a wall up and kind of push me away instead of taking the time to learn about it and learn how we can keep engaging in whatever it is that we're doing while I still live with schizoaffective disorder. And I really feel that that is kind of ultimately why I got pushed out of jobs and why, even most recently, I just never heard back from an employer after I shared that I was struggling post-hospitalization. Stigma kind of infiltrates how someone who's living with schizophrenia engages with the world, unfortunately. And it's kind of up to everyone to kind of do better in terms of leaning into being more open to talking about things like schizophrenia and learning from people who live with it about how we can still have them as a part of society. So I briefly mentioned that current depictions of schizophrenia in news or in media are really, really negative in general. And I think that this is largely where, misconceptions and fear stems from about what it means to live with an illness like schizophrenia. I think that there are many shows, Criminal Minds and Law and Order and all these shows come to mind as shows that depict schizophrenia as this scary, person who is deranged in some way, committing awful, violent crimes. And it's always kind of the reveal, like this serial killer had schizophrenia. And I think that this is really, really unfortunate and does such a huge disservice to people who are actually living with an illness like schizophrenia, because that's just not the reality for most people. Yes, some people who are living with schizophrenia commit violent crimes, but it's the exact same percentage of the population as the general population who commit violent crimes. I think there's also this narrative in news about mental illness, and particularly mental illnesses like schizophrenia, being why horrible acts or crimes are committed, such as mass shootings. And we actually did a full video on whether or not there's any truth to this, about whether or not mass shooters largely have schizophrenia or not. So if you're interested in that, check that out here. I think there's also the narrative that we've been kind of taught about the homeless person down the street who is shouting things into the abyss or whatnot as, having schizophrenia. And sometimes that's true. There is unfortunately a higher rate of homelessness in populations that are experiencing mental illnesses like schizophrenia, but it doesn't mean that they're scary people to be avoided or anything, which is kind of the narrative that goes along with that. There's a lot to dissect with that narrative and that, occurrence within society. But basically, ultimately, these people deserve our help. And also, there's a lot of ways in which society is kind of letting these people down and letting them fall through the cracks, which is why there is actually a higher number of people experiencing homelessness with schizophrenia. I think ultimately what it boils down to, though, is a degree of xenophobia, where people feel a degree of fear or discomfort with people who are different from them. And it's easy to see how you could see someone who's living with schizophrenia as being really different from you. But ultimately, I think what's important to understand is that their brain just works a little bit differently. And the way they process the world and experience the world is different, but it's not bad or scary. And it's important to understand that in terms of leaning into being more open to talking about it. There has been so much work done in the past 10 or so years around awareness about mental health and mental illness. But I think we're still kind of stuck talking primarily about and accepting primarily things like depression and anxiety, or maybe even things like stress and trauma. But we're still not really getting all the way to accepting and being able to talk about and normalizing illnesses like schizophrenia. So why is it important to normalize illnesses like schizophrenia? Basically, where it kind of comes down to is reducing stigma. Stigma is a really negative influence in people's lives who are experiencing a difference, like living with schizophrenia. And it can be really debilitating in terms of how they engage with and operate within society. If we can reduce some of this stigma and have more accepting dialogue and normalized conversation about what it means to live with schizophrenia, I really believe that this will improve people's access to care that they need in order to better manage their schizophrenia. Anosognosia is something that people who are living with schizophrenia often deal with. And basically what it is a lack of insight, or really a lack of acceptance and insight into the fact that they are living with an illness. And so if we can normalize talking about it more and make it more acceptable to live with an illness like schizophrenia within our society, I think that this would help to combat some of this anosognosia that people who are living with schizophrenia often face. I know that I myself have faced periods of lack of insight, anosognosia, where it became really easy to convince myself that I didn't have the illness and I didn't need to talk about it, didn't need treatment for it, because it's not something that is welcomed to talk about within society. Not only will it lead to helping people accept their own diagnosis, but it will just lead to better integration within society. I talked about being pushed out of jobs when they found out that I had schizoaffective disorder because they just didn't know what to do or how to deal with it. And they didn't really take the time to learn from me about how we could still work together with me living with schizoaffective disorder. And so the more we can normalize having conversations about differences, really is what it comes down to, but differences like illnesses such as schizophrenia, I think the better we're going to be able to integrate various members of society within the greater society. This also chalks up to just embracing neurodiversity. I think that neurodiversity can offer a lot to various facets of society, and it's really something that we should embrace more than be afraid of and uncomfortable with. Part of this idea of normalizing talking about schizophrenia, normalizing accepting people who are living with schizophrenia, also has to do with the language that we're using to talk about issues like this. And something that I want to draw your attention to in particular is the use of the word crazy. I still hear people to this day referring to other people as crazy or other things or whatever is crazy. And I don't know, what I feel when I hear people using this vernacular is a little bit of disdain, disappointment, because ultimately I think it's just a really lazy way of looking at people who you don't understand. And I think that this crazy label is often attached to people who are simply falling through the cracks of society. So what can be done in terms of working on normalizing talking about schizophrenia or accepting people who are living with schizophrenia? So first and foremost, it's really important to just educate yourself. Make sure you do know more about the illness so that you're not part of this problem of just being fearful of the unknown. Try to have empathy and understanding when talking with someone with lived experience of living with an illness like schizophrenia. It's very hard to just know what someone's experience has been like, and so be open and receptive to hearing about the experiences of other people and also learning about how to integrate them within society and how you can work with them to accommodate their needs. Don't be afraid to challenge misconceptions when you hear them. If you hear someone talking about mental illness like schizophrenia in a stigmatizing way, don't be afraid to challenge that. And lastly, watch more videos on our channel or other channels where people share more nuanced first-person experiences of what it's like to live with an illness like schizophrenia. So thanks so much for watching this video. I hope that this video, as well as others on our channel, helped to kind of remove the fear around talking about schizophrenia and helps to move the conversation in a more positive direction. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, wishing you and your loved ones good health. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.